Okay, so tonight we're going to continue with our conversation about ADHD and its impact on your practice. And we're going to talk about strengthening your mental flexibility and impulse control and what does that mean. A couple things that I wanted us to go over as we always start is our agenda. We'll start off with some follow-up questions, some reflections from last session. We'll talk about mental flexibility, increasing attention, and addressing procrastination and impulse control. And then at the end, we'll have discussion questions and takeaways. And of course, we'll have some comments and conversations throughout the presentation. So keep up the lively conversations and feedback and sharing your experiences. All right. So um, a follow-up and reflections. Anybody have questions lingering from last week? Any comments, impressions, things that you've implemented? It could be from last week or from any of the previous weeks as well. If there's anybody that wants to share. All right. Nobody's sharing today. It's all right. We'll hopefully get some feedback or a participation later on in our presentation. So I did want us to kind of go over a couple things just to highlight based on our conversation. I'm sharing my screen where there's apps where it changed written information into digital. And so some of the what I was referring to, and I think Neva had also shared a Remarkable 2 tablet as well as a Rocketbook are two that I have found that, and I saw that they were recommended. So if people do like the writing aspect of note taking and keeping track of things, this is a way that could help also be efficient with being able to write it down, but also changing it to a digital or electronic. Okay. There was a question between self-compassion, self-care, and the idea of making excuses. And I thought that it was interesting or something for us to really think about the differences and just to clarify it a little bit more because we do. I was sharing these terms and I want to make sure that we have a good understanding of them. So when you think about self-compassion, it's made up of three parts, and it's self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. And it has to do with you being able to recognize the challenges and accepting the fact that not every day will be perfect. All right. And so what you're doing is you're celebrating your successes and learning from those setbacks. And it has to do with one's mindset. So if you think of, everything is bad and negative, well, then you're not really showing self-compassion to yourself, right? And how to have self-compassion, you cultivate an awareness of your thoughts, you forgive yourself, follow your passions, treat yourself like a friend, nourish your mind and body, and practice a supportive touch. So, and we've talked about like nourishing your mind and body, and that's going to be exercise, sleeping. Um, when we're thinking of uh, supportive touch, you might give yourself like a gentle stroking of your arms or cradling your cheek with one hand, because our bodies like sensory input. And so that could actually help with that. Interestingly, providing yourself with a kind of physical touch can stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. And I know last week there was a question about parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. And so when we are feeling anxious and dysregulated, it's the sympathetic nervous system that goes online. And in order for our bodies to remain that homeostasis, then we have to then the opposite system has to go online, and which is the parasympathetic nervous system. So being able to give yourself that a supportive touch can help stimulate and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. When we're thinking about self-care, the idea is that you're prioritizing your physical and mental health. This is where we had said it's non-negotiable, building in that non-negotiable time for yourself, and where you're basically practicing, good exercise, or you're engaged in an exercise you enjoy. You're getting good quality sleep. And what's really the qualifying word is good and quality, or those are the two terms. All right. So getting good quality sleep and taking time to participate in activities that you enjoy, right? When I hear about the comment was, some people may say, oh, well, you're making excuses because maybe you were expected to do these tasks, but then you decided to do other tasks. And so maybe some comments might be, or you don't have ADHD, or that's just an excuse. I see that as people just minimizing the differences, the realistic differences and challenges that ADHD brings. And I think that they just don't understand what ADHD is and what those challenges are on a day-to-day basis. It can feel demoralizing and dismissive, but ways in which you can challenge some of those is using self-talk to challenge some of the thoughts and feelings when somebody makes disparaging comments about the differences and challenges that you have. And then also providing psychoeducation about how ADHD impacts your work. And we're definitely going to be talking more about that next week when we talk about working within your environment or managing the work environment. And I know we're going to also talk about interpersonal conflicts, because that's another topic that has come up, and questions that have come up. Okay. There's another comment or question that came up in between sessions was the what if question, or the idea of somebody that feels as though they need to carry everything because they fear that the what if I need this material, what if I need that material. And so what I would say is that whenever you're thinking of the what if, or you're constantly saying, but what if this, what if that, that really is you in an anxious state, right? It's the what if something's going to happen, right? Because we're never thinking of what if something good is going to happen, right? We never ask those questions that way. But when we're asking the what if, is that we may be thinking of you're thinking of those error thinkings, or thinking errors that we talked about a couple weeks ago, is many times with the what if question is catastrophizing, right? It's, if I don't have this material, what am I going to do? Right. And many times these are all solvable things. The what if question, and how about if you were to, I needed this particular book, and what if you needed it? Is that the end of the world? Are there no other way to kind of solve that problem, right? And though that goes toward those other topics and techniques that we talked about, problem solving, right? Being able to look at what your options are. And we'll talk about more of that this evening. And how do you address that? I will tell you that some of the things that we talked about in the past, like self-talk, using the dysfunctional thought diary, thinking of the worst case scenario, the best case scenario, and the likelihood, the most likely outcome. And thinking of kind of what we talked about a couple weeks ago, as well as, using your defense attorney, cognitive reframing, Socratic questioning, what advice would you give a friend? And even when you do these things and you're still struggling, I will always say that, that you may be getting to the point where, this is where you need professional mental help, and support, and that's, I would say, seeking out, a therapist, or a psychologist to kind of further explore these strategies, and what might be holding back, um, or interfering with your work. Okay. So some of the things that you can do, as well as addressing some questions that have come up in the past. Any questions so far? Okay.
Hi, hi,
Oh,
Michael. There was a question in the question and answer about the self-touch and the parasympathetic nerve system.
uh
And somebody asked that they mentioned that they have a habit of playing with the skin on their hand, particularly at times of stress. And she wanted to know, is that a coping method designed to stimulate their parasympathetic nervous system?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. If that touch, when we feel a warm embrace, right, we feel much more at ease. Why do we feel at ease? Is because the parasympathetic nervous system has gone online, where it will allow for you to be much more calmer. So absolutely. And so you've kind of figured it out without me even saying it. You've been doing that along the way. So that's very good feedback and insight. All right. So moving on, we talked about time blindness. We talked about making sure, again, kind of just revisiting and reinforcing some of these concepts, noting start and end times, and reflecting how accurate your prediction was can help you become more aware of time that lapsed, right? And we're going to talk about awareness, and a lot of the things everything really that we've been talking about is becoming more self-aware, right? And just all of these different aspects. So making sure, noting the start time, end time, and seeing, going back and predicting if you were accurate or not. And then using timers that either rings, or vibrates, or just being able to see something visually, where you see the passing of time. Right. And so there's an example here, where this timer goes up to an hour, and you set it, and the whatever time you have, it turns red, and then as the time goes by, that the portion of red decreases. And so you can use this as a visual, like, okay, so you've set a specific time apart that you're going to accomplish a task. That's what you're going to be working on for that period of time. And you can use this as a visual cue. Right. The other things that you can think about is using a smartwatch, or your phone, where you're using it more for a timer, not for distractions. And we'll talk about that in a bit, managing devices and distractions, where you can use a watch where when it vibrates, it basically is indicating that the time frame that you've set aside to do some work, now you're able to stop, right? You get some type of a cue that will help you realize that time has passed. And the more you start connecting time that's passed, you become more aware of time, and how much time will it take for you to complete certain tasks, and very similar tasks. And that's why it's good for you to be noting these things down, because then you can always come back to how it is. You can refer to these notes when you have to do the task again, right? So you're not reinventing the wheel. and you have that information in your workspace that you can retrieve when you need that. And so if you had to work on, like, let's say an estate case, and there's some, and you know exactly, what you had to do and how long it took, and then maybe a year later, you have a similar case. Well, instead of reinventing the wheel, is going back to, what did you do? Like, what was that plan? Um, how did you approach it? How long did it take? And then you're able to use that as a reference. Because again, executive functioning, the idea of executive functioning and differences is sometimes not being able to recognize that there have been prior experiences that you've already gone through, and then being able to understand how you can do it again. And so just becoming more aware of those things. Okay. So now let's move into, what is procrastination? Maybe somebody that hasn't spoken, if they can briefly just say, when they think about procrastination, what comes to mind? It's a tough crowd tonight.
I see Ardith is raising her physical hand.
Oh, okay. I don't see her, so I'm sorry. Ardith, go ahead. Okay.
Ardith, you're muted. You have to unmute. She's still muted. Oh, Michael.
Okay. So
Okay.
we'll move on. If Ardith, you're able to unmute, we'll come back to you. But when we're thinking about procrastination, it's the avoidance of task, or thinking that I'm going to do these other tasks before these other ones, and so you kind of almost rationalize why you're not starting the task, right? And then that's where the task initiation or lack thereof comes in. And so procrastination is the avoidance of the tasks that need to be completed within the time that you're supposed to be doing it, especially if you're scheduling that time. The intentional time that we've been talking about is scheduling intentional time to complete these tasks. But then when the time comes up where you're supposed to be completing these tasks and you avoid it, well, that's the procrastination. Right. And so understanding, the first thing is, again, is becoming aware of what causes the procrastination. Right. So some of those things would be, what are your escape behaviors? Right. Being able to take an inventory as to what are they like. Do you tend to get uh, distracted by checking your emails, or social networking, or going to your favorite websites, or reading, or taking a nap, right? The enjoyable activities that we all like to do. And then of course another a number of other activities that um, might not be enjoyable, but maybe less stressful, right? And so the idea is that you're just not doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? And so some of the things that you can do is, one, increase positive reinforcement for on-task behaviors, and we're going to talk about rewards in our presentation, and how you can give yourself positive reinforcement, and why it's important to give positive reinforcement. And so the idea is a statement that you can say to yourself: if I find myself checking emails, then I will remind myself that it is an escape, and I will check it after I complete the 30 minutes I scheduled for this task, right? Being intentional about, one, acknowledging that you're procrastinating. What is it that you're doing that is causing you to procrastinate? And then saying to yourself, being able to verbally say, I'm not going to check. Um, my email or feed into my escape behaviors until I've completed that task. The more you do that, the likelihood you verbalizing that, the more likely that you're going to follow through with your behaviors. It's the same way as last week we talked about, sharing, what tasks that you're going to do to a friend or a family member. And the idea is that when you verbalize it, you're more likely to follow through with it. Dealing with procrastination, this is just an example or sample activity that you can use or an exercise that you can use. And the idea is, identify the task which you're procrastinating, recognize those automatic thoughts, as we talked about a couple of weeks ago at the beginning of our series. I need to be in the mood to do X, right? If you have that thought, I need to be in the mood, and you're not in the mood, you're not going to probably do the task. If you say to yourself, I don't feel like doing X right now, you're less likely to completing that task, right? So it's really making sure that you're recognizing those automatic thoughts that feed into, as we talked about in cognitive behavioral techniques, that our thoughts influence our behaviors and our feelings. And so, you want to keep your automatic thoughts in check. um Label your feelings, as if it's because, if there's a sense of boredom, just being able to understand why it is that you're procrastinating and what's coming up for you. And then now thinking of, highlighting why, or thinking about what's the value in the task that you need to complete. And we talked about this in reference to change, right? There has to be a belief that, you're motivated to make some change, and that there's a purpose, and value for you to make change. And so procrastination and dealing with procrastination deals with the same thing. Being able to recognize that, okay, yeah, maybe you don't want to do this, but also being able to understand why you don't want to do it, but then also countering it with, what's the value? What do I get out of this? If I were to do this, and if it is more of like you feel more positive about yourself, you feel more accomplished, well, that should then, if you're recognizing those things, you'll be more likely to use them, and again, positively reinforce the behaviors so that you're more likely to accomplish the task. And also here is, investing a few moments or for discomfort and uncertainty. And we talked about that in one of our other previous um, lectures or workshops, where, sometimes it's okay to feel that discomfort and uncertainty, and not being able to sit in that many times is because of the mindset that we have. And it could be, that anxiety that is being produced. Setting up a reward system. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself. What are some rewards you can give yourself for following through on your plans? What are immediate rewards? What are rewards that are much longer or bigger incentives for you doing larger tasks? Um, what are some enjoyable things that you can link with your task plans in order to increase your follow through? And what are some of those positive experiences you notice when you follow through on your plans and get things done? Right? And when we're thinking about positive reinforcement, we have to understand why this is so it's so useful. And there's a lot of research out there of doing rewards. And some people will say, well, why do I have to do a reward? Or maybe it might feel awkward for them to give themselves a reward or think about it. But if you think about, how behavior is shaped, there's two ways you can think about this. The first theory is the Premack principle, and if there's people on the call that have children, or have ever worked in schools and things like that, there's the idea of the Premack principle, and with the Premack principle, the idea is when you do X, or you do one thing right? That's really an undesirable task before you get to the desirable task. And so when people are able to follow doing a task that they don't enjoy with something that they do enjoy, what happens is that you start pairing off the positive experiences of doing the undesirable task, and you're more likely to do the undesirable task at a later time. Right? It's about building the possibility of with the follow through. The other theory of learning is operant conditioning. And the idea behind operant conditioning involves rewards and punishment. More specifically, we're focused on schedules of reinforcement. Schedules of reinforcement allows us to determine the rate of rewards. So for example, the idea at the beginning is in order for you to build that momentum when it comes to rewards is to consistently give yourself a reward every time you accomplish the undesirable task, right? Eventually you move from a continuous reinforcement, right? So after I complete an undesirable task, I get myself a reward. You move to more of a variable ratio schedule. And what does that mean is that it's reinforcement given at random after the behavior occurs at unpredictable number of times. It's, this type of reinforcement is really easy to establish. It's hard to extinguish. Why I say that is because variable ratio schedule is why people get into gambling, right? They never know when they're going to get reinforced, so it actually gets stronger, right? And so that's kind of the premise of gambling, going to slot machines. You never know when the time that you're going to get the reward. But in order to get to that point, you have to be able to really recognize your reward. What can you give yourself for accomplishing the undesirable task? And you do that frequent, where then you move toward a more variable schedule of reinforcement, right? Examples of positive reinforcement. This is congratulating yourself, taking a short break, a few minutes. If someone's available, tell them what you've accomplished. And then again, give yourself a reward or a taste of some privilege or activity that you enjoy, but make it small and brief. Okay. Any questions about positive reinforcement, schedules reinforcement, procrastination, feedback? All right. So now let's move on to task initiation or avoidance. What are you avoiding? And again, this goes to those procrastination. And this is something that you can do, on your own, where you um, draw a line in the middle of a blank page to make two columns. On the left side, you list 5 to 10 projects, tasks you're currently procrastinating about. In the right column, you write down the reasons why you're avoiding or the task, or why you have avoided the task. And look at, are there kind of common themes that run throughout this? And why is this important? Well, becoming more aware, and again, everything that we're going through is all about self-awareness. As becoming more aware of your avoidance helps you understand the type of procrastinator you are. So once you know what type of procrastinator you are, you're more likely to know what are the things that you need to change. So let's talk about what is impulse control. Okay. And so anybody want to take a stab at, what is impulse control? Right? No takers, but all right. So, oh, Elaine.
Okay, I feel badly nobody's answering you, Doc.
Don't worry.
So, so I'll jump in. For me, very frequently, it's stopping myself from talking as much as I do.
Okay. All right. Not being being able to
That's
control, not being
one of the
talkative.
things, yeah, one of the impulses. I mean, there are others. This is very much an issue for me and part of my ADHD, but a big part of it is stopping the incessant talking.
Okay. Thank you, Elaine.
Mhm.
Very good impulse control you shared right there. You demonstrated. Victoria.
Sure. So for me, I think it's more about like wanting to do something enjoyable and trying to stop myself from doing that at a moment when I shouldn't be doing it.
Okay. Very good. Same question, right? What is impulse control, but defined very differently, right? And I think that that's important too, that these symptoms are not the same for every person. Thank you, Victoria. Nancy?
So for me, I think I'm kind of right up there with the person who talks too much, but also in line with that, it's interrupting. I interrupt and I feel terrible, and I've done it in a courtroom, and it's terrible. But I just I it's very hard to control that.
Thank you, Nancy. Neva?
I think that impulse control is anytime we have the I want tos and we choose to not follow through. So definitely in the positive, but also in the negative, like maybe a snarky remark. Like my brain can be really fast. And it's important that I not let my mouth be as fast as my brain because
Absolutely.
not every thought is one that is worthy of being heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, becoming more aware of these things is helpful to make some change. Carl?
Yeah, I'm really appreciating those things I've just heard about speaking up when I shouldn't speak up, but it can be sort of an automatic thing too, and it's those automatic things that get me in trouble, and helping to recognize those things is and then having the will to not do those things that seem automatic. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Deborah? Oh, she left. All right.
Oh,
But we'll,
I'm still
oh,
here. I'm
oh, I'm
still
sorry.
here.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was on mute. Sometimes in a group, I'll overshare type of thing, trying to say what it is that, I've gotten better with self-talk of you're talking too much. However, it's an impulse to help people. And I had someone stop me once and say, just let them ask for your help as opposed to offering it. And that was great advice. And we have to be able to hear that advice without being reactive and defensive, which is always a trial and tribulation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Deborah. So some of the addressing impulsivity, and of course, we're looking at when people ask you to do something, right? What are some things that you can do to buy some time? The first thing is, again, figuring out where impulsivity is a big problem for you. Is it at work? Is it while dating? Is it in a conversation? When you're shopping with a credit card, right? And the idea is that you're performing a simple action to buy some time. So for example, in here is being able to inhale and slowly and exhale slowly. And before you respond, you say, well, let me think about that. Um, or just saying, let me see now, pensively, after inhaling or exhaling. The idea is that you're not responding right away. You're just buying a little bit of time. So just being able to become more aware of your breathing and slowing down your breathing will buy you some time. Other things that you can do is um, 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 movement, almost practicing when you're when you're kind of locking up something with just kind of moving your hand, that motor movement. And you can do that like with your hand behind your back or in your pocket, where it just gives you that cue to slow down before making a response. Another way that you can do kind of slowing down some impulsivity before you make a response is kind of paraphrasing what the person's maybe asking you to do, or with your boss. So let me get this. So you might say, so let me understand this. What you're asking me to do, and then before you ever commit, because I know that we have had conversations where people either overcommit or they'll say yes to the first thing that comes to mind. Somebody asks them to do something and they say yes. And then of course they kind of feel bad afterwards, and they find themselves in a situation where they feel uncomfortable because now you're feeling dysregulated, because you're feeling overwhelmed with all the amount of responsibilities that you have now taken upon yourself. So being able to slow down the breathing, focus on the breathing, and then being able to kind of paraphrase what the person might be asking you to do could help and build some time. The idea also is that you have to practice this. It's not none of the things that we've been talking about and will continue to talk about for the remainder of this presentation and next week's, is you have to practice, because these things don't come naturally and automatic for individuals that have ADHD. So in order for it to become more automatic, it needs to be practiced. Another thing that you can do is with addressing impulsivity is practicing speaking slowly in front of a mirror, and maybe thinking of somebody, a role model that you can tell, that that speaks slowly, and try to see if you can kind of mimic their rhythm of speaking, so that you again start practicing just the slowness, right? Because with ADHD, many times it's not just the impulsive decision making, risk taking, but also just this pressured speech that comes with that as well. So thinking of, if you notice that you have a lot of pressured speech, kind of slowing that down. An example that I came across was, think about yourself as a Southerner instead of a Northerner, right? As Northerners, people that are in New York, especially people in the city, we tend to talk fast, we do things quickly, we walk, we're always intentional of where we're going, right? We're always in a rush. But when you go down south, right? There's this, people move slower. People take the time to get to know their neighbors and talk. And so thinking of yourself in a different role, of somebody that speaks slowly, and that could help address some of the impulsivity. So what is working memory? Okay. The idea of working memory is the ability to hold information in mind that guides one's behavior. It allows us to do what we know. Okay? Repetition, repeated exposure helps with working memory. Practicing in front of a mirror, recording yourself could be helpful. There is writing things down. There is a strong neural connection between the ability of thinking and putting the action in writing. Their memory increases. And that's the reason why there's a lot of things that I've been sharing where it's asking you to take out a piece of paper or a notebook or things like that, because there is that neural connection from the thought process into the motor movement of your hand, will increase memory. There are two types of working memory: nonverbal and verbal working memory. The idea with nonverbal working memory is to be able to use tasks or things that you need to do in a more visual representation, or you can kind of almost put things, steps that you need to take to accomplish a task in a more visual way. Some people can do that mentally, a mental representation. Some people may have to, again, one of the things that we talked about is making it external, moving the stuff that is internal external. So getting more visual representations that are tangible. It could help with the nonverbal working memory. And the verbal working memory, what you're doing is that you're pairing the visual representations of whatever the information that you're trying to remember, and you're pairing it with language. And so here it is that you tend to start asking yourself questions like, what's going on here? Like, you become your own interviewer, and you ask yourself, using language, what's going on in here? Have I been in this situation like this before? What did I do last time? Also narrating what's happening out loud can be helpful. Externalizing and externally vocalized words, even if it's at a whisper, are more powerful in controlling and guiding our behavior than words we may say in our mind. So being able to intentionally say, this is what I'm going to be doing, planning, when you've planned tasks out, talk through those plans, because you're more likely to follow through with it, and it also helps with your memory. Interesting fact, the most common sign of being too stressed is forgetfulness. Stress negatively impacts your ability to make and retrieve memories. And the most consistent ways to improve mental health is, can anybody guess? There's 2 ways to improve mental health. Anybody want to give a guess? Sleep and exercise. All right. Sleep and exercise improves mental health, which then helps with memories. Okay. An activity that you can do is create a narrative, and we kind of went through this a little bit. Where you identify a task you need to do, and you tell a story from a beginning, middle, and an end of what the steps are you're going to take. And again, if it helps out, write it down, and actually do the task. Ways in which you can kind of use how you can test your memory, your working memory, is by doing steps 1 and 2 that are referenced above with a new task, and then ask a friend, family member, or somebody to interrupt you while you're doing that task, and then be able to go back and say, well, what were you doing? Or you say, first of all, you tell them that you'll accomplish the task that they are asking you to do when they interrupted you. But then you also then repeat the task that you were accomplishing, or what the next steps are that you were going to take prior to you being interrupted. So just example, some exercises that you could do. Testing your memory, again, taking a notebook, going into another room, taking inventory of what's going on, what's in that other room, and then coming back to the other room that you started with, and writing down what stuck out to you. What did you see in your room? Becoming aware of, just increasing that self-awareness. Because once you become self-aware, then there's things that you can do about it to address these areas. So did you know emotions help make memories stick? When we're thinking about memories, emotions are a really big contributor to that. More specifically, emotionally charged events and information are the easiest to remember, but the hardest to forget. Negative emotions creates the strongest memories. It takes extra effort to become aware of positive emotions, which leads to positive memories. So if you only remember the times you messed up, then your self-image only sees you as a person who messes up. And so the idea is that you want to start making a concerted effort to label positive experiences. Um, if you have no memory of what you need to do, of an important or of an important piece of information, you can pause, take 3 slow breaths. It will reduce your anxiety because when we are forgetful, is usually when we're stressed, and is a sign, forgetfulness could be a sign of anxiety. And so if we're able to reduce your anxiety, or by taking the 3 breaths, it will reduce your anxiety and improve your focus and ability to remember. So what is attentional control? Anybody want to give it a stab here? Okay, no takers. Well, and attentional control is um, be able to shift your attention. It could become just becoming more aware of what distracts you, and being able to manage those things that distract you. So, for example, our next slide here is managing your devices. There are phone lock boxes that are out there that you can use, that you can put a timer on, based on whatever it is, the timing that you have put aside to do a task. The most common sources of distraction are smartphones, tablets, and computers. When you sit down to focus on a task, it would be best for you to turn off your notifications, turn off any chat programs, close your email, and close extra browser tabs. If you struggle with keeping certain websites or apps under control, when you need to focus, you could actually download some blocking apps, such as an app for iPhones called Self-Control. There's a program or an app called Stay Focused on Androids. Or Stay Focused, I'm sorry, I believe there's an extension for Chrome, if I'm not mistaken, that's what it is. And then Black List is on Androids. Other things you can think about is consider using a distraction log. And it's basically a dedicated blank piece of paper or notebook that you keep next to you when you're working, when you're working, and whenever an idea or any thought comes in, or something that you need to remember pops into your mind, write it down and move on. The idea is that you can always come back to it. But if you're trying to always, try to focus on the assignment that you're doing or the task that you're doing, and then all of a sudden you also have these distractions, and now you have what you're supposed to be focusing on, plus all of these other distractions or other things that you need to remember, that drains the capacity of your working memory. And so we want to start alleviating some of that. Again, writing it down, those neural connections, increases memory, as well as decreases anxiety and stress. And also using sometimes noise canceling headphones could also be helpful. Here, some managing common distractions, blowing distractions away. And what do I mean by that is, recognizing, so when you're in a focused state, your breathing is rhythmic and consistent. But when anxious and distracted, your breathing becomes shallow and erratic. When you feel distracted or notice distraction-based thoughts, taking slow, full breaths can help improve your attention. And that's what blowing distractions away means. And then blocking distraction with another distraction. Some people find hearing music with a consistent beat and with few to no lyrics are the best to focus. Here's another exercise for managing media and devices. And so so here it is, that the idea with this task is that you basically want to ask a group of friends, family, coworkers, a question, a simple question that you know that they're going to be able to answer very quickly. And then what you do is that you turn on your notifications, your volumes all the way up. and you put the phone face down in front of you. And the idea is that you start completing a boring task. You know that it's a boring task, and when your phone buzzes or rings, you don't pick it up. And I want you to then you take notice as to how long did it take you before you had that urge to pick it up. Right. The idea is that you become more aware of passing time and to practice managing your devices. Of course, this is kind of contradictory to some of the things that we just talked about before. But the idea here is that there's different ways that you can manage the media and the devices. And so you want to look at what you're practicing these different strategies and seeing what works for you. Right. Not all of these are going to work for every single person on this call. So just recognizing that. Increasing awareness. So there's ways that you can do some self-talk. We talked about kind of becoming an interviewer earlier in our workshop, in our time together. And here, what we're doing is that you ask yourself these questions. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Is what I'm doing getting me closer to my goal? Right. So you want to be able to ask yourself these questions when you're starting to become distracted, right? And that's how you start noticing these things. Self-interruption, keep a notebook of how many times you have that you get interrupted. And just keep track of, how many times you interrupt yourself when you're completing a task, and then when other people interrupt you. Self-interruptions can be your own thoughts, websites, visiting websites, text messages, doodling, completing other projects, cleaning, grooming, petting your dog, and so on. So it's not just you're not completing the task, but the idea is that you're doing other tasks when you should be doing the task that you're scheduled and planned for. So what is mental flexibility? Is there anybody that could go through this? And basically what you're doing is that you are reading, or the way that you're reading this is that you are reading the ink colors the words are printed in. Is there anybody that would be willing to do this task? All right, Adam. Oh, Adam left.
I put my hand down. Actually, I'll let Joanna go ahead.
All right, Joanna.
I actually used to try this on a mental, increasing your memory thing. So we'll see if I can still do it. Red, blue, orange, purple, orange, blue, green, red, purple, blue, blue, red, green, orange, red, green, orange, purple, orange, blue, purple, green.
Very good, Joanna. Very good. And so what did you, and you don't have to answer, Joanna, but did anybody could notice what happened? And Joanna, you can answer if you want, but.
I know I definitely got slower once I got past those first couple of lines where it switches from them matching to where you got to stop and think a little bit about what you're seeing versus the color you're seeing versus what you're reading.
Absolutely. And that what you did was an example of a color word interference task that is looking at verbal cognitive flexibility. It's the ability to shift attention and be able to inhibit at the exact same time. And that's a challenging task to do because you have to pay attention to what you're doing, but also be able to inhibit the instinctual response is you start reading the word, right? And so, but you have to be intentional here of you're disregarding what the word is because you're really looking at the colored ink, right? And so that builds what we're thinking of mental flexibility. Adam?
And I've also mentioned this in the chat. I've seen it where the display actually starts where the third line starts on your slide. So right away, you have to get out of the mindset of reading words. And it's like, oh, I'm not being asked to read words. I have to launch into, I'm seeing green, red, purple, blue, blue, etc.
Yeah. And so, what happened with Joanna, that you described was also at the beginning, it was the rate of responding was much faster because it matched the in color and the word. But then all of a sudden, when you have to shift, things become a little bit slower, right? You have to be paying attention to that switch. Very good. Thank you. So how do you do this? How do you maybe this is again an exercise that you can do to harness attentional shift. And the idea is that you think about the thing that constantly pulls your attention down, like a negative thing that constantly pulls your attention. And write the thing down on a post-it, again, writing things down, right? Those neural connections, and putting it in your mirror, on your bathroom mirror, and on a separate sticky note, write down where you want your attention to be, right? Based on the previous step. And then what you want to do is that every day, for 7 days, you read out loud the name or description of the negative attention, then thinking of what happened in step 2, and then reading it out loud. And what you wrote down in your first sticky note, I mean, your second sticky note of where your attention should be, right? And here you want to do this multiple times for 7 days. And the idea here is that attentional shift improves where you're able to go from one task to another. Another way that you want to think of increasing cognitive flexibility or mental flexibility is understanding Plan B, right? Just being able to do things quickly when you find yourself in a situation. And so for people that have ADHD, it's hard for you to come up on the fly when there's an issue come up where you have to decide, what is your plan B, right? And so these are two exercises that you can do to kind of increase your cognitive flexibility and really thinking about your plan B, right? Because sometimes there are times where you need to have a backup plan, but it's hard for ADHD or individuals with ADHD to plan ahead. So practicing shifting gears and getting to plan B quickly is important. Next week, we'll talk about is our last session. And we're going to be talking about managing your environment, and that will include requesting accommodations, how to talk about talking to your coworkers about ADHD, and some other topics that, if we have the time, I'm going to include as well, like perspective taking and some other topics that we haven't gone over that might be of interest and use to the group. And we'll also talk about interpersonal conflicts, and we'll go from there. So looking at the time, it's 6:01. Any discussions, questions, and some takeaways that I'd like to end our time together. So just want to stop sharing my screen here. Adam.
I think a lot of what you've covered today are practices that I had to put into practice just to complete the survey. I finally did it last night because I know it wasn't a hard deadline. Stacy had asked us to do it right after last week's session. I didn't think I was in the right frame of mind to fully express everything. So that was procrastination. It's like, I'm not ready to do this. And that happens with a lot of things. But yesterday morning, I made a note saying, do that survey tonight, because I didn't want it to linger more than one session. So that was a way of managing distractions. And during another meeting this morning at work, I wrote down another list of thoughts that came to my mind, things that I have to do later. So in terms of planning and in terms of that neurological connection of writing something down to memory, going back to the survey, it's like I was able to put that into practice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Adam, for that feedback. So putting things into practice and not recognizing some procrastination, but then you also held yourself accountable and completed the survey. So thank you for that. Did you reward yourself?
Um, I suppose in a way being here is the reward, but it's like nothing explicit, just okay, relief. One more thing I have to do. I probably did listen to some music online, and maybe in a way subconsciously I thought, okay, I got the thing I needed to do out of the way, and now I can take a moment for myself, something brief and small.
Absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else? Just
I
anybody
have a
else want to?
question.
Sure.
With reinforcement schedule, that's something I'm very familiar with. The whole idea, like, okay, if I get this, this, and this done, or say like I work like, okay, in 5-minute blocks, and then I get to, listen to a song for a minute. When you're having trouble for yourself, or say like I'm trying to get my daughter to do her homework, stretching that further, because I know that's the goal with reinforcement, is to be able to go longer between the rewards.
Mhm.
Any ideas for like when you're having trouble getting here? Because you get your brain fixed on, say, like, okay, 5 minutes of work, and now I'm telling myself I have to do 10 minutes, and like you get that feeling in you, okay, it's been 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think the thing would be is always thinking about the reinforcement may sometimes they become saturated, and so then you
Mhm.
might have it's not as reinforcing anymore, and so you sometimes have to look at other reinforcers. I
Mhm.
think that sometimes when I am working with parents, there's this um I know what's going to reinforce my child without asking, and I'm not assuming that this is in your case, Joanna,
Mhm.
but many times that sometimes kind of addresses that too. Of am I picking reinforcements that really aren't reinforcement? Right, because
Mhm.
there are definitely a lot. There's motivators out there that just food is a natural motivator. Of course, there's a slippery slope at times with food, and especially if there's history of disordered eating and stuff like that. So there's that aspect of using food. But I will tell you, you know when I'm working with families, and when I'm working with, when I was in the schools and I was trying to use some reinforcements, I would just give them a whole list of like a menu of reinforcements that they could possibly choose from, and they kind of rated it. Like they went, so I gave them a list that they can pick from, and so it allowed individuals to expand. Oh, I didn't think that this could be a reward. Right. And so maybe being able to do more of an reinforcement inventory, and allowing your child to kind of look at what would be motivating. Gift cards, sneakers, video games. I mean, so there's the food aspect things that you can use, and more tangible.
Mhm.
Of course, you want to make things that are bigger projects, right, should be bigger rewards, right? So you want to also think about the reward itself. How big or small is it? Um,
Yeah, that's why I feel weird sometimes, because I'm actually better with her. She has gotten better that she will work for, I mean, she's 15 years old with special needs. So she can work for 10, 15, 20 minutes at a time sometimes before she gets that reward for her. Like coloring's her big one, but I do try to remember to ask her, do you want something else? Like even a choice between. I have a kid that will do written math so that she can do a math app because she's
yeah,
kind of a mather. But I'm still like, I feel like I'm stuck with me, and especially trying to avoid food rewards because let's face it, we all love them and it shows more once we get older.
absolutely. And I think there could be alternative rewards that are food, that are
Yeah.
food. And so I
Mm,
think that it could be something that could be used.
mm, mm,
But always thinking of getting that buy-in from your child. But
mm,
also one of the other things that you mentioned was giving
mm,
choices. That's so important for rewards. So maybe thinking of, because not your child might not want the same reward every single time that they're completing that particular task. It could be more of, here are 3 things that you can choose when you complete your math assignment, and then go from there. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Neva.
This is a little bit of a trigger topic, the sense of rewards and behavioralism and things like that. I've seen a lot of people, like I have a friend who used to use giving her son M&Ms to poop. Like it's creating its own negative, it's creating a whole nother problem. And so I think we have to I think we can use our intelligence that allowed us to become lawyers to go beyond those first things. Pay attention to your kids, and anything that gives us a little bit of dopamine is the reward that we need in our brains. Like if this is a session about lawyers, yeah, sure, a lot of us are parents and we're dealing with neurodiverse kids too, but if we stick to the topic of us, like I know like stickers never, ever, ever, ever motivated me to be able to get over the hump to do anything. And the thought of trying to have a chart and keep a chart made it worse. It became another whole thing that I couldn't track. Thank you, Victoria Riker, for, the smiles, the recognition there. And so anything that will just give the tiniest spark of dopamine is the first thing to get us going. And so for me, like I don't enjoy cleaning houses. I had a roommate that loved it in college. It was the greatest gift from God ever. I don't. But what I do is I have a few that I've broken down into under 5 minutes. And if I go do that task, like I feel really good because I've done something that, wasn't on my list, but I actually can look forward to it because I know I can complete it really fast. Like cleaning my bathroom sink. I never make it like cleaning the whole bathroom. It's just like there's such a huge difference between tasks and rewards. So anything that will change that brain chemistry in a good way. There's lots of good vagus nerve things that we can just do by like stroking our hands and things. The YouTube has lots of great videos on that. That's really calming. And I would encourage us to think beyond the word reward, because it gets into the whole capitalist system of
Well,
entitlement and payment and everything. And
well, let's okay. So, and that could be a whole another
yeah,
topic, Neva.
I
mean,
recognize.
one of the things that I would probably say is, it always is going to go back to why we're doing the rewards, the intention behind the rewards, the mindset behind it, and of course, where you were saying, thinking about rewards is kind of a triggering topic for, and that could be something that you yourself have experienced, and of course, when we're talking about rewards, you had to have paired that from at some point to then be able to say, look, I will get that dopamine if I'm able to do the tasks that I don't like to do, but if I'm able to break them down into 5-minute tasks and I can do it quickly. But before you got there, you had to have been pairing, and those are some of the learning theories that we were going over. So you're much more advanced in that learning theory than maybe other people are, and what reinforces some people may not be reinforcing to others, right? And so at the end of the day, when we're thinking about schedules of reinforcement and positive reinforcement, there's tons and tons and tons of research out there that is effective. And so when we're thinking even just any reward that's going to motivate the person, or the child or the individual, but you have to start somewhere. And so when you start off somewhere small, which we all know food is absolutely reinforcing because it is a basic primary need, and that's where we can use some of that. But I do agree with you that there is some caution about how we are using the rewards and what we're using as rewards. And so there's a lot of different ways that we can discuss it. but definitely, there is that reward, right? How we train, our pets to behave and things like that. We're using schedules of reinforcement and positive reinforcement. So, and that could be applied, the theories of learning could be applied to everything. So I do think that, you definitely have some valid points. I do think that there are times where, there may be some negative interactions or experiences that you've had with it. And so those are definitely things that could be explored as well. But I think as an overall idea here is finding something that motivates the person so that they feel good about it. Because if all people do go through life and everything is a roadblock and everything is negative, 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 then that's what brings us into feeling overstress, anxiety, depression. We have issues with our physical health, our mental health. We're not at our 100% true capacity. And so the idea here is just being able to get to the point where people find some success and have positive experiences, as I mentioned, with memories, developing memories. It's much more effortful for people to have positive experiences. And so if we are able to, and put aside some things of capitalism and things like that, the idea here is just finding ways in which is going to motivate people to actually get the task that they haven't been able to do. And so that's going to look very different from one person to another. But I think we're on the same page, Neva. Okay.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. V. Riker, you'll have the last comment.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm on the same wavelength as Neva. And the challenge I have is to find rewards that are actually meaningful to me, that I actually consider a reward. Like once in a while I would think, oh, Hershey Kisses. And then I go out and buy a bag of Hershey Kisses. And then instead of using them as a reward, I eat the whole freaking bag.
Well,
that's
then
impulse control.
That's exactly, that's where I was
And, then I'm like, okay, so the impulse is don't buy the Hershey's Kisses. So I cut that impulse control, but then I don't have the reward. And so I'm constantly looking for those rewards. And like Neva said, okay, clean the sink. That feels so good to have a clean sink. Great. Mine is the shower glass. I take the sponge and I do the shower glass after every shower and I feel good. But again, that doesn't help me in the day-to-day routine of getting my tasks done. It doesn't help me in the day-to-day procrastination. It doesn't help me in the day-to-day timing. I can know that something is going to take me 4 hours and then I'll say, okay, I will give myself 8 because I always underestimate.
Well, that's good self-reflection and self-awareness.
But when you do that, then it's like, okay, so then I get started and I get it done. And then again, you run into those blocks and it's done. So what? There's no reward. It's done. So what? And then there's no incentive the next time to do it. So I'm always looking for what is it that is rewarding? And okay, getting in my car, blasting the radio, driving down the highway, singing, that's rewarding. But I need a place to go. I can't just get in my car and drive around and sing.
Well, I don't know. Why not? Right? Because you're saying you can't do that, but I would argue.
I mean, there's a lot of reasons why right? I can, but there's a lot of reasons why I won't. Environmentally unfriendly, cost gas, blah, blah, blah. But, again, if people have suggestions for rewards other than food, that are things that I would love to see everybody else's lists of things that they find rewarding, because like Neva said, cleaning that sink, it's a little bit of a reward. And suddenly I could identify that cleaning that shower, yeah, that actually is one of my rewards.
Well, and I will tell you what you're also describing, and I think Neva did too, is you're also using another type of reinforcement in learning, which is called classical conditioning. Right. And then we could have a whole conversation about classical conditioning. But the idea is that what you basically described, Neva and V. Riker, you also alluded to it, is I get a reward by just having that clean sink. But again, that's not something that we naturally are going to be rewarded for, right? So you have to be able to start pairing something that typically doesn't provide a natural reinforcement, and pairing it with something that is reinforcing. And whether you're doing it mentally or physically, you are pairing something that typically does not give you a sense of reward, but you're now doing it where you're pairing, okay, so when I do this, right, I now then get this dopamine fix, right? But you have to continue pairing it together. It's like the idea of um, uh, the research in psychology is Pavlov and his salivating dogs. And the idea is that if I am able to pair a bell and food, right? So the food naturally gives the dog to salivate, right? And so if you present food every time Pavlov realized, wait, the dog starts salivating, right? But then all of a sudden they start pairing a bell with the food, right? And so if you put them together, then what ends up happening after a while, they associate the two: bell, food, salivate. Now, if I remove the food and I just present the bell, well, now the dog still salivates without the presence of the food. And so that's how you get classical conditioning and operant conditioning. With schedules of reinforcement, we're really talking about operant conditioning. What I just described and what you and Neva kind of described are more classical conditioning. And that's another way that you can look at it as well. But you have to be able to explore like all of those options. But classical conditioning is going to be much more challenging to do, because you have to pair it together to get the reinforcement and get that same response. All right.
I could go on and on about this topic, but I will
Well, thank you.
contain
Thank you.
myself.
No,
And I'd love to talk with you further, Neva, about these kinds of things, because I think you and I are very much on the same page with the Staples button.
Yeah, and I put the link up for anybody that's still on. It's like one of the last things in the chat. It's just from YouTube. Click the link and you'll hear it. It's like so silly. It's so fast. And I had a class of kids I was teaching, and we had memory verses. And if they got their memory verse right, they got to hit the button. There's a Spanish one too. Like, it's hysterical. It's so funny. It like, and as attorneys, I think, working by ourselves, especially if you're like me working from home and nobody else can hear what's going on in your office, you can just do it. Get a paragraph done, open the document, boom, that was easy. Like, it's reinforcing, it's positive, it's silly, and it just breaks it up.
Yeah.
So, and there's no calories. There's no gas, there's no environmental problems. You'll need a battery or two, but
Absolutely. Well, I think I appreciate everyone's, comments and feedback, and their insight as to what's working, what's not working, maybe just getting that self-reflection. And I think the idea here is, as I think we all could recognize this evening, that things that will work for one person may look different for another person. And it started off with the conversation of when I asked, the simple question, what is impulse control, I believe? And we had 3 different definitions. So, the idea here is that how we're viewing these differences that we've been talking about, what's going to motivate each one of you is going to look very different. And so that, I think, the biggest thing, the takeaway that I keep on hounding and beating down is self-reflection, self-awareness, because when you're able to do those things, then at least you can make some change. And that's what's most important. Your change and your process, what your experiences are going to be maybe be very unique to you. And although there might be shared experiences, like, many of you on this call might have difficulty with processing speed or initiating task, or, planning and problem solving, but how you actually approach that is going to probably look very different. So the idea is, I work with a lot of clients that have I have a lot of clients that are anxious and depressed, and even though they the symptoms are similar and it's the same diagnoses, how it manifests itself is very different. And I think that's where we need to look at what works for people, what doesn't work for people, and really getting that really true understanding as to what really motivates you, what doesn't motivate you, and really self-reflecting, and that self-awareness, but also being self-compassionate and taking care of yourself as well. So with that, thank you again for such a successful evening of discussion. And I know that we could definitely have more of a discussion moving forward, but we'll stop here, and thank you for everyone for your time. And we'll see each other one more time next week.
Thank you, Michael. Everybody have a great evening. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.